Hello, good evening. Beautiful day outside, everybody. Thank you all for coming to our next pro tip, which is the series by and for Barnard professionals, faculty, and staff. The inaugural one was really great, really wonderful. I was part of it. Aaron, who is over there, he was also part of it, and Professor Ann Higgany, who is not here at the moment. But it's great to see everyone here who is new, great to see the people who have returned back. So a reminder about the format is that we have 3 Barnard Pro Tippers, as we like to call our experts, who will do brief presentations. All of you who have questions, sorry, you got to get them at another time. No Q&A here. But please do stay for the entirety if you are able to. So first, I would like to introduce Dr. Tara Well. Barnard has been fortunate to have her on faculty for 20 years. Wow. Wow. I mean, thanks for hanging out with us. She has been teaching personality psychology, health psychology, and psychology of leadership. We recommend checking out her book, which is in the back with Khadija and Emma back there. The book is called Mirror Meditation, The Power of Neuroscience and Self-Reflection to Overcome Self-Criticism. Sounds like something we might all need. Yeah? Okay. And it is to gain confidence and see yourself with compassion. And it was published last June, so June 2022. She's the recipient of funding by the National Science Foundation and the National Institute of Mental Health. So we have a feeling that Dr. Well is ready for this pro tip since she has appeared on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, NBC Nightly News, and a number of podcasts, including the Psychology Podcast with Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman. Thank you, Dr. Well. And everyone, again, check out the book.
Thank you so much for that introduction. So the title of my talk is Becoming a Small Talk Expert. And if you know me, you might realize that this is kind of an unusual topic for me because I am an extremely introverted person. I'm the kind of person who likes to go from my office to the restroom and back again and try not to run into anybody so I don't have to have a conversation. But I am, in recent years, I've been trying to change my ways because I've been focusing on mirrors and reflections and the importance of face-to-face contact with others. Face-to-face contact is one of the cornerstones of our development. Early face-to-face experiences, such as those between a mother and child, are important to develop our sense of self. It's how we learn to regulate our emotions, and it's also how we learn to be in coordination with others so that we become less awkward. And we continue to need this face-to-face contact as adults. And small talk is one of the ways that we can get the benefits of face-to-face contact because we can't just kind of, stare at each other. We have to kind of do something. So you might have noticed that in recent years, your opportunities or your experiences of having face-to-face contact with people have decreased. And this is a general trend in our world, mainly due to the fact that people are spending more time alone, and they're also spending more time looking at their devices instead of each other. And then the restrictions of the pandemic didn't really help our face-to-face contact very much. So if you felt socially awkward during the pandemic and after it, you certainly weren't alone. And there were several factors that came into play that made us feel more awkward and sort of more anxious as well. One is we're always staring at our screens. We spend a lot more time online looking at our screens. Even before the pandemic, there was a correlation between anxiety and screen time. Now, it's a correlation, so we don't know which direction it goes in, but probably in both directions, meaning the more time you spend looking at your screen, the more anxious you become, and the more anxious you are, the more you tend to grab your phone and look at your phone. Also, staying at home had us kind of get out of practice socializing. Also keeping a distance from people. We had to sort of make an extra kind of like almost unnatural effort to try and make contact with people and see them. And wearing a face mask. We couldn't really see people's facial expressions very much. And research shows that when we're missing that kind of information, we can oftentimes fill it in with the worst. Like if you've ever noticed a silence or a pregnant pause, you might oftentimes think that maybe someone doesn't like you or something that you didn't go over well. And when we can't see people's faces, we're often more likely to attribute that they're having negative feelings about us than positive feelings. So how can we become less awkward? Well, the thing to do is get out there and have more real-time, face-to-face interactions with people. When we do this, we can see other people's facial expressions. And by practicing looking at other people and seeing their facial expressions, it helps us to understand and process our own emotions, and it helps us build empathy and understand how other people are feeling. Also, we engage in a process called facial and social mimicry. The idea is when we're face-to-face with people, we tend to mirror each other's emotions and oftentimes our body postures as well, particularly if we like other people. Even our vocal intonation will sort of develop a sort of harmony and a rhythm when we're with people. And that's a very emotionally and psychologically satisfying experience for us to have. Also, we can process nonverbal information when we're face-to-face with people. And we're more likely to build trust in our interactions with people when what we're doing nonverbally matches what we're saying. That's one of the ways that actually we detect whether people are being deceptive, is when their nonverbal behavior doesn't seem to match what they're saying. So I was writing a lot about this during the pandemic and before in my Psychology Today blog, and a reporter from Vox found it, and he wanted to interview me about small talk and how small talk had become especially painful and kind of awkward and weird during the pandemic. And so I talked with Alex Abad-Santos on the phone for maybe like about 40 minutes or something. And what I thought he was going to do would be to like interview a bunch of different academics who knew about the topic and then pull out quotes from what we said and put his article together. But what he did instead was he took the complete transcript of what I said and published it in Vox, okay? And so what that was like me sounding really socially awkward talking about social awkwardness. And apparently a lot of people saw it, including the producers of The Daily Show. So they contacted me and they wanted me to do a segment in which I taught Michael Costa how to be a small talk expert. And they wanted me to be socially awkward, and I didn't disappoint. I was very awkward during the whole thing. You can watch it, it's on YouTube. But and they filmed, there was like a lot of cameras and stuff. We were in the tower in Milstein. And they filmed us for about 90 minutes, and in the end, it was like 90 seconds of me talking on it. So what I thought I would do would be to share some of the things that didn't quite make it into the segment, because I think it's a lot of good information that I think could be very useful for us as we acclimate back into the world post-pandemic. So first, here's three functions of small talk. So the first function is to gather information. When we small talk with people, we find out about their values, and we learn what values we have in common with them and what values are different. Also, gossip. We learn two things when we hear gossip. We learn one in terms of the content of the gossip, and then we learn about the person who's sharing the information, and we can gauge sort of how much we want to trust that person with personal information based on what they're telling us about other people. We can also learn a lot about the social climate, social groups and organizations by just what people tend to talk about, what are their kind of moods, what are the topics they keep bringing up, and we also can learn what's most important to them. There's a principle in personality psychology that you're more likely to find out about people's individual personalities when situations are ambiguous. That is, when situations aren't socially scripted. It's not clear what you're supposed to do or say. So when you kind of ask these open-ended questions and kind of are just talking without a script, you can find out a lot about people in terms of what they care about, what their worldview is, what are they constantly thinking about. Those are the kinds of things they tend to want to chat about when they small talk. Then the second function is to build trust. Okay, we're less likely to objectify, research shows that we're less likely to objectify people when we've small talked with them. So we're less likely to stereotype people or make assumptions based on their demographics or their appearance if we've had some real conversation with them, and in other words, created a human connection with them. So it's not just an abstract, they're not just an abstract idea. Small talk is also necessary if we want to go deeper and develop personal and business relationships. We can't just dive in. We have to sort of get a feel for people and have them know a little bit about us before we become more involved in business and personal relationships with people. We want to know some basics. Small talk can also lower social filters and have us be less guarded and more spontaneous. Once we start feeling safe with people, we get a little bit more warmed up, and we have that sense of familiarity. It's also a way that we can show our flaws and vulnerabilities to a point. So oftentimes we might think that people are very, very perfect, or they have this sense about them. And then when we start talking with them, we realize, they're human too. They have these foibles. They have these other things going on with them. And that makes them more relatable. So the third function is to have fun, okay? So when you small talk with people, you can lift your mood, like if you're working at your computer all day or you're dealing with a problem, and your mood can instantly shift if you just have a conversation with somebody. Just keeping it lighthearted, playful, and that feeling of being human, making that human connection is so important. Also smiling. Now, everybody's been in a situation where someone told them to smile and they didn't want to smile, okay? But if you do smile, you might want to try it. This is the audience participation part of the talk. You just smile, right? Okay? All right. So when you smile, something happens called facial feedback. Facial feedback is you actually feel happier because the muscles of your face are smiling and they're signaling to your brain that you're happier. So it really does work. So all those people that were telling you to just smile, you'll feel better, were right, according to science. So the other thing that can happen here is that people then tend to associate you with pleasant feelings, okay? So if you're having fun with people, then they remember you as somebody who's fun. So they invite you to do more things socially. They invite you to professional opportunities, social opportunities. They see you as a fun person, so you get more included into things. And it's also good feedback to know, like, how are you making people feel as you're small talking with them. You can kind of hone and increase your social skills. So, are you making people feel awkward, or are you making people feel fun? I'm thinking that you want to make people feel fun, so I'm going to tell you how. First, here are some topics to avoid, okay? Don't talk about money, politics, religion, sex, or death, okay? Now, some of these might be self-explanatory, okay? But if they're not, there's also some good research in social psychology. There's something called the false consensus effect. The false consensus effect is that we tend to overestimate the degree to which other people hold the same views as we do. So when we make that assumption, it can lead to some problems when people don't always agree with us on these topics that can be a little bit contentious. And given that small talk is supposed to be fun, it's not Twitter, it's not a debate, that you can avoid those topics. And here are some safe topics that you can talk about instead. Talk about the weather. Talk about sports. Talk about your family, food, work, travel, hometown, and hobbies, okay? So now here are some small talk tips and tricks that will help you get through the experience, okay? So first, focus on others more than yourself. This should be, obvious, but what oftentimes happens is if you're in a situation, you're feeling nervous and anxious, you'll tend to focus more on yourself, and you'll worry about, what other people think of me, and what if people know I'm anxious, and what if I say the wrong thing, and blah, blah, blah. And then pretty soon you're completely focused on yourself, and that can create a feedback loop that actually makes you more anxious. So what you always want to do is, if you're in a social situation, you're feeling anxious, is put your attention out onto other people. So focus not on what can happen in the situation to make me feel better, better, but what can I do to make the person I'm talking to feel more comfortable? How can I help them be more at ease? Also, to develop a genuine interest in other people. Instead of trying to get them interested in you and how fascinating you are, to take your attention off of yourself and put them on other people and see what you can find out about other people. Let other people talk more, but don't be lazy. If you find yourself talking too much, it might be that you're kind of overwhelming people with too much information. If you're not talking enough, the other person might be getting tired because they're feeling like they're holding the whole conversation. So what you want to do is kind of have a give and take going there. One of the things that you can think about too is let the other person teach you something. If you go into a situation and you think that everybody there knows something that you don't know that you would benefit from knowing or would be interesting to know, which I think is easy to imagine, then you sort of have a mission that's taking your attention off yourself and how anxious you are and how weird it feels to be in this social situation onto discovering who's there and learning new things. So the second tip is to ask open-ended questions. So, what's been the highlight of your week so far? In some cases, that sounds kind of like a Trader Joe's question, you know how they ask you that thing? But it does work because it helps people to talk about what they're passionate about, talk about what they want to talk about. You're just not saying, what's keeping you up at night, these days. It's saying, something positive. Or what's keeping you busy these days? Not what's keeping you up at night, okay? And people often prefer that to asking what you do, because not everybody wants to talk about their work, or if they're between jobs or their work stressful or whatever, they don't necessarily want to talk about it. Okay, and ask interested questions instead of intrusive or interesting questions. And so intrusive questions are, questions that are too personal that you don't want to answer. And oftentimes people fear getting involved in small talk because they think they're going to be asked a bunch of questions that they don't want to answer. So there's kind of the best way to deflect an intrusive question is to say, why do you ask that? Or what would you say to that question? Or you can keep it fun, you can keep it playful, but again, putting the attention back on the other person oftentimes works out really well, because again, when we get anxious and we put on the spot, then that's when we start to feel uncomfortable. Now, there's a difference between interested and interesting questions. Interested questions are directed toward the person and you're interested in them. Interesting questions can sometimes be a setup for the person to hold forth about a topic. So, for instance, say you're an art professor and you're really into art and that's your thing and you want to talk about art. You go to a party, you're looking around, you kind of want to talk to somebody and you want to talk about art, okay? So if you ask them an interested question, you say, do you like art? And if they say no, then you just don't pursue it unless you're really a jerk, okay? But if you ask an interesting question, you say, so what good art have you seen lately? Okay, and then the person goes, and the person doesn't know anything about art, so they're like, I don't know, what kind of good art have you seen? And you're holding forth for the next 20 minutes talking about everything that you know about art and why that person should be interested in art and everything. So I'm just saying that because I know we have some academics in the room, and I know I've been both a victim and a perpetrator of this particular style of interaction with people. So again, if you're interested in the other, if you ask an interested question, then you're kind of drawing the person out in terms of what they are interested in talking about, what's kind of passionate and alive in them, and then that's likely to have a conversation where you can discover more things rather than just share your extensive knowledge on your favorite topics. So then 3, have a plan for sharing. Okay, so oftentimes, and if you do a lot of social gatherings, if that's part of your job, you probably know this one pretty well. And the idea of having a story or two ready, talk about a new hobby that you have or a trip you went on, a story that you would enjoy telling and that you think that people would enjoy listening to. Okay, avoid oversharing. Okay, small talk is not therapy. Okay, and that's actually a quote that came. That made it into the Daily Show. And, this might sound obvious, but it's, again, one of those things that if you're feeling anxious in the moment, you can oftentimes share too much and like, ooh, I probably shouldn't have said that, So one way to avoid doing that, avoid saying things that you might regret later, is to really take the time to center yourself and to work through any anxiety you might have before you enter a social situation. And that's where my work with mirrors comes in, okay? So you can practice in front of the mirror. There's lots of exercises in my book on it, and there are different ways that you can use a mirror. One is to use it for self-coordination. As I said earlier, we use face-to-face contact with other people to become coordinated. And sometimes we can lose that sense of coordination if we spend too much time, again, alone and on our devices. So taking some time after you've been looking at a screen or something and no one else is around, and just kind of coordinate, move your hands, move your legs, and see yourself in the mirror and just feel your humanity. You're not just a head who's thinking things, you're a physical person. Also, you can get some very interesting information about your facial expressions. So oftentimes, and the people I work with the mirror meditation work that I do, oftentimes people discover that they have certain facial expressions or emotions that cross their face that they're unaware of. So what happens is oftentimes you realize that you look terrified, or you look like you're scowling, and you wonder why no one's coming up to you to talk to you at a party. It's because you look like you're being tortured. You look so, unapproachable. And so learning what you look like to other people and why they might not be coming up to you, and how to just relax your face and do that smiling can really work. It can also help you switch from a critical to a kinder voice toward yourself. Well, one of the main things that we find is that people are oftentimes much more unkind to themselves than other people are. And the driver of social anxiety is really the idea that we think other people are going to criticize us, but really we're our own worst critics. And so recognizing that, having yourself with compassion, and then just, having a chat with yourself to kind of get warmed up before that social situation will get you ready for and satisfying small talk. So there are more tips in my book on managing social anxiety, taming your inner critic, developing confidence and social presence, increasing compassion for yourself and others. So get the book, and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Well. And I almost now want to make everyone turn to each other and have small talk conversations. And you should teach journalism courses. Journalists could use these tips. Thank you. So now for Rachel James. Rachel currently serves as the Senior Associate Director of the Barnard College Media Center. She is the producer of the podcast Writing Home, American Voices from the Caribbean, and freelances as a screenwriter. Rachel received an MFA in screenwriting from Columbia University Film School and holds a BFA in film video from California Institute of the Arts. Her feature film screenplay, The Swells, was on the 2019 Blacklist and the Hit List, and is in development with the Assemble Media. We're so glad to have you here, Rachel, in 3D. That's Emma's joke, by the way. I thought it was a good one. I want to give you credit. Welcome, Rachel, everyone. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel. I brought my security blanket, AKA a printed screenplay, which I carry around with me everywhere. I need to absorb it through osmosis. Even if I don't have time to work on it on the subway, I hold it. And that makes me feel more productive, so we're here together. I was thinking about this pro tip. I didn't realize I was going to get an introduction, so I wrote all these impressive things about me, I was on the blacklist and the blue list. But I think one thing that's interesting about all of these things is the blacklist is like a hit TV show for some, but it's also a very nerdy Hollywood thing where they distribute a list of these are the best unproduced screenplays circulating around at the moment. And it's, I think, interesting because it says a lot about what screenwriting is, which like to me, it's like an obsessive art form, but at the end of the day, it's just like a blueprint for a business model. And yeah, it's an interesting kind of like writing practice to engage in as somebody who like spends a lot of time on it, and then you're like, oh, but nobody's gonna publish it and then pick it up on a shelf and enjoy it. It's gonna become something that someone else makes. So I included this quote by Stanley Kubrick, which I really like. A film is or should be more like music than like fiction. It should be a progression of moods and feelings. The theme, what's behind the emotion, the meaning, all that comes later. And I was a huge fan of Kubrick. I still am. But in my 20s, it was really major. And I they had this like rotating show of like a big retrospective about him at the time. It was at MoCA in Los Angeles, and I went and saw, and they had some of his screenplays printed out and framed on the wall. And that was a huge turning point for me to see. They had like 2001: A Space Odyssey and Clockwork Orange and The Shining and all these films that I watched religiously, to see how visually and also as you were reading the words, you felt the movie through that piece of text on the page. And that was like a real like click-in moment, like, oh, this is cool. I'm gonna get into this. So a little bit, I guess, I'm just gonna talk today about my process a lot. And writing is so much about pre-writing for me. So it's really like, it starts with like the germ. What is the germ of the story? For me, it's always something I'm upset about or obsessed with, or like a weird idea I get, like, oh, what if that person just like lost their minds and jumped out the window? I write a lot of dark stuff. So this is where it all comes from. That's really the germ. And then I start thinking about a protagonist. And I have these like long lists of questions that I write myself, like, what's their astrological sign? What's their favorite color? Do they like movies? What's their favorite movie? But also like, what happened to them as a child? What was rewarded in their household? What was punished? How are they a product of that behavior? Just like spending an obsessive amount of time thinking about who they are. Similarly with research and world building, so love going on the internet. Clio, also a great resource, especially if it's like I'm building something about a place or people who are unlike myself, then it's like tons of research, tons of articles, tons of books. And then sort of establishing tone and style. So I'll skip back and forth. One thing I do for every script I write is I make a playlist. So if you go to my Spotify account, it's just all these like weirdly named playlists, but each one is a script. So I have a playlist that when I sit down to write, I turn it on, and that is me like getting in the zone. And I do the same thing with images. So sometimes lately it's all Google Slides. Or like when I used to be really into Tumblr, I would make a Tumblr for each script. So these are actually a couple different ones. The ones to the left are something I'm writing right now. And then on the right, those are for a script called Big Bad Wolves, which I finished a couple years ago, but did kind of wellish in the universe. But I will, when I feel stuck, I'll like have that on half of my screen and then my screenplay doc on the other. And I'm just like looking at these images, listening to the music, trying to like get into that like vibe. And then this is an example of like my character questions. This is from a script called Tony Tony. And in this case, I got really into procrastinating, so I made like a very beautiful document answering these questions. But talking about like what's the character's philosophy of life at the beginning of the story. And I like to, I have gotten assignments like this in school, like when I did my MFA, but as I continue it in my own writing practice, I give it to myself like an assignment. So I like to keep it, tell me, Rachel, what is your character's favorite color? When are they the most unhappy? And that I find to be really helpful for building. So this is a bit about my process flow pre-writing I just talked about. Then I start drafting beats, so like anything that occurs to me for the story, like, oh, there should be a scene where blah, blah, blah. Usually I put it on index cards, or if I'm on the subway, I like write it in the notes app a lot or in a notebook. And then playing with structure, I start like moving them all around, ideally, but also just thinking about what's the first act, what's the inciting incident, all of that cool stuff. And then for me, to be honest, then I start thinking about how is this structure breaking the rules? This is too traditional. How can I make this funkier? How can I piss some people off? Like the more traditional screenwriters amongst us. And then comes the not so fun part, which is the actual writing process. Because now you're like, oh no, I've run out of things to procrastinate about. I now must put things on the page. And my rule is like, write everything poorly. Because if you try to write it well, then you'll never get actual words on the page, or that's true for me at least. So I write bad dialogue. Sometimes I'll just be like, scene where she enters cafe. Moving on. Like, I have no ideas. I just have to get from page 1 to the end, and then I can print it out and start really challenging myself. So that's where I print it out, and you can see, like, this is what it starts to look like with all my crazy, chaotic revising. And for me, this is like really where I start to feel like, oh, okay, now I'm writing, now I'm a writer. And then when you plug all that back in, then comes the interrogation. There should really be another loop because then it kind of all starts over again. But part of interrogation is like sharing it with other people. Getting their notes, but also asking yourself really tough questions like, who cares? Or like, what are people feeling at the end of this movie? Like, what am I saying? That's the hardest one. I hate that one. But it's really good to interrogate yourself in that way because someone else will ask you 100% every time, tragically. So my thing about like, what is the excellent writing versus, or this is just me being a jerk to myself, I'm always thinking about like, how can I establish mood and tone? And the idea that the reader should be instructed on exactly how they feel from like the first several lines of a screenplay. So I gave some examples here. And this is like me trying to have my Kubrick moment, right? Where I'm like, now you can see the movie. But the idea is like, okay, if I'm watching a horror film, you wrote me a horror film, I should feel creeped out from the very first moment that I start reading it, not like get 10 pages in and be like, oh, it's scary. So, I mean, that's the ideal, for sure. So this is my script, The Swells, and now I feel self-conscious about reading it out loud, but I'll just go for it. Exterior Lake Gerard, New Jersey, early morning. A quiet lake extending as far as, oh wow, there's a typo in my screenplay. As far as the eye can see, surrounded by dark, thick woods. That's just particularly hilarious because so many people have read it. Low-hanging mist creeps along the glassy surface of the water and over a lake island lying still at its center. A war cry echoes in the distance. It sounds distinctly animal, yet there's something eerily human about it. As if activated by the cry, a swell surges to the surface of the water. It quickly begins to travel across the lake. We rush to follow its charging path. So that's the first scene. And hopefully it makes you feel like, ugh, crap, what's gonna happen? This, by contrast, is a sort of like very pulpy action film that I wrote, Big Bad Wolves, which I mentioned, and the idea is that it has like a totally different vibe. It's like energetic, you jump in, there's voiceover, super cool sounding characters. The action is like lip liner application, nails filed to a deadly point, hair fluffed, a pop of bubble gum. So ideally you have an idea of like, okay, I know what universe I'm in now. This is not scary, this is badass. And then this is another one of my scripts called Tony Tony, and it's kind of like a coming-of-age drama. I don't have to read it, but it's another example of like, it's a totally different vibe and place, and hopefully the idea is that it's setting the stage for you. So I would say like the first page of the script is where I probably spend agonizingly too much time. And in relation to that idea of how it's an art form, but also like a sales pitch document, it's like, that's the difference between writing a novel and a screenplay, is like, the people who are most likely reading it, you know, they're not picking it up because they're bored and they want to read something interesting. They're picking it up because they want to see, like, do I want to make this movie? Do I want to pay for this movie? So you have to convince them to keep going, past the first page, past the first 10 pages. So if you're like, let me just really take my time, ease my way into the story, it's like, no, you get that much time. And then by the bottom of the first page, you should be like slapping them in the face with something interesting, or they're out. You know, they're like, next. So that's, you know, like my love-hate thing about screenwriting. And I will just sort of wrap it up by saying that to me, screenwriting is like an exercise in trying to trick yourself into continuing, because it's really agonizing sometimes. So these are my tips and tricks for like, how do you actually write? Change up your environment. So, you know, if you're in a quiet, dark room, go get on the subway where it's really loud and crammed full of people, vice versa. Go to the cafe, go right in the bathtub, you know, like, what can I do? I love getting out of my house. This is my favorite excuse to be like, I need to go to the woods so I can write. Torture yourself further, write something totally different. So I was stuck on Big Bad Wolves. I started writing The Swells. So I was like, I don't know what to do with this action movie. I'm gonna write like a brooding horror. And everyone's like, where are you finding the time? And I was like, I don't sleep. Watch films, go to a museum, expose yourself to something new. Like, all of this stuff can start feeding ideas. Similarly, I took this one out, but I was like, what's upsetting you today? Does that belong in your screenplay? You know, just like playing exercises with yourself. Relatedly, decide that bad movies get made all the time. Keep writing your bad movie. I spend a lot of time, again, it's the same as, you know, like, if you think it's gotta be perfect, you'll never write anything, so just write the bad dialogue. I have to tell myself all the time, like, it doesn't matter how awful it is, because otherwise I will just fixate on trying to make it good. Talk it out with someone. Like, I often ask my wife, like, how would you solve this problem? And then I'm always like, that's a terrible idea. And it really helps me figure out what I want. Like, having to tell her why her idea wouldn't work, I'm just like, and I got it, thank you. That solved it for me. What's the mood and tone of your film? Immerse yourself in it. Again, all that pre-writing stuff, but like, sometimes I listen to the playlists over and over, even when I'm not writing. Look around and look inward. You know, people watch on the subway, journal, think about stuff, what's upsetting you. So yeah, it's just constant engagement and fun. Thank you. And I just want to put my bonus page on here. Is my daughter this morning was like, what are you doing? And I was like, well, I'm a writer and I'm going to talk. And she was like, I want to touch the E. So this is my humbling addition. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I've learned so much, honestly, that apparently literary publishers are kinder people. I'll let them know that. Everybody, please make sure to also check out Rachel's podcast, Writing Home. And later in March, visit barnard.edu, because she will be featured in our Off-Broadway series, which is about our amazing staff on campus. We will be featuring her and her work, which she just presented to us just now. So thank you, Rachel. Okay, now, finally, not lastly though, but finally, in addition to being the Pro Tip producer and almost Barnard's everything, Cynthia Yang is here to speak with us in her infinite time. I don't know how. You may know her in her current capacity as Associate Vice President and Special Advisor to the President, in which she is also managing, I don't know why these things are not on my face, also managing the college's presidential transition. Who is it? In addition to overseeing the events management department and auxiliary services, which includes mail services, print services, and real estate. Cynthia. Or you may know her from her time as the college's COVID-19 czar. Yes, she kept us all safe and alive and informed. Cynthia created our pandemic response team and rapidly stood up, created programs and staffing for testing, tracing, quarantining, all those verbs that we would never want to hear again, namely quarantining. Barnard College can't get enough of Cynthia because she is also an alumna, graduate of class 2002, and she has worked here for several years, took a little break, more than a little, right? Maybe, but you've been here for a lot. So, okay. And she's also an event producer with Ronnie Davis Productions. So thankfully, we got Cynthia back in 2018. So now we want to hear about what Cynthia does, which is everything, as you just heard. And maybe she will take a hat off and let us put a hat on for her. But please, Cynthia, tell us everything that we don't need to know, because you know a lot.
Let's talk about imposter syndrome right now, but instead, we're going to talk about Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, also called BJJ, and how it can change your life even if you don't actually train it. I'm going to do my best to try to keep to the time, but if you need to leave, whatever it is. I won't get hurt. So how are you involved, obsessed, with BJJ? So photographic evidence to the contrary, I actually wasn't an athletic kid. And it wasn't until adulthood that I started getting into moving around, fitness, martial arts. And so I started jiu-jitsu in 2016. Last year, I was awarded my brown belt, which is the one below black. And really, though, with each belt change, I've realized that every promotion just indicates that you now understand how much more you have to learn and how much more you have to improve on. So please don't be impressed by the belt color. So what even is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? It is a relatively young martial art or combat sport where you and your partner or opponent try to submit each other without using strikes. And so what do we mean by submit? Well, it's tearing joints, it's choking off air supply, it's strangling so you limit the blood flow to the brain. That sounds like fun, right? But each person has the superpower of tapping, right? So if I tap, I indicate what is happening to me right now needs to stop, and it will. And so when we spar or fight or train, we also call it rolling. And a roll is ultimately a conversation in which you are trying to grind down your partner's will to go on. And let's see. Okay, so what does a conversation of jiu-jitsu look like? We're going to ask a legendary jiu-jitera, Bia Mesquita. She is considered the female goat. So this is high-level jiu-jitsu. She's taken the back. She got her superpower. Tammy exercised the superpower of tapping. So it stopped. And here's another competition. So it looks arguably chaotic. Those of us in jiu-jitsu were like, oh no, there's like 17 different nuances that went on in each second. So how come this won't go? So what does my jiu-jitsu look like? Oh, would that it looked like this. Would that I were standing over the people with glory. No, this is what my jiu-jitsu looks like. I am the person with the green arrow. I'm the person on the bottom. I really wish that this were face-to-face contact. Other kinds of contact, it seems. So And here now, I'm here because, in terms of what might jiu-jitsu have for you, even if you don't train it. And I want to say that kind of these life lesson slides are written from the perspective of a learner, but in terms of us being teachers, instructors, mentors, managers, there's also an element, if you invert anything that's about learning, it can also be about teaching, training, and managing. So I just offer that as well. So, period, full stop, unfortunately, to some, to me, growth comes from being uncomfortable. David Bowie said it. The prophets have said it, we can consider that to be fact. And jiu-jitsu is the art of being comfortable with, or of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. And there's multiple forms of discomfort, so many. There's physical, certainly, as you saw, psychological or egoic, that's a big one. I should be so much better at this. Please don't pay attention to me. But a really important distinction everywhere in any domain is that uncomfortable or unpleasant is not the same as unsafe. So growth comes from being uncomfortable. Growth can happen when you're experiencing something unpleasant, but I really don't think that growth can happen if you're feeling unsafe. So I just note that. So what's the ultimate goal of training jiu-jitsu? Okay, so rather than play the clip, if you haven't seen The Princess Bride, watch it. I won't fully act it out. But there is a scene where it's called the Battle of Wits, and it is that poison has been poured into some cups, or a cup. Tricky though, isn't it? Is it one cup? In any case, someone dies. Who wasn't really expecting it? Luckily, jiu-jitsu isn't really lethal, but it's a good metaphor in terms of what our goal is. Our goal is to trick our opponent. Our goal is to eventually become victorious. And there are a number of paths to victory. And I anticipate some of you are like, well, that seems like there's a dialectical tension. We're saying that BJJ is an empathy machine when you're seeming to break people's spirit and their bodies. But there is an aspect of it where I need to understand what my partner's thinking or feeling. I need to understand what they should be feeling with this kind of submission. I want to understand where they are. If I were to compete, we won't go into that. But I want to understand their psychology so I can get the better of them. And an important aspect of what we say is stop playing their game and make them play yours, right? I am short and small. There are things that my body can do better than other people, but there are things that my body can't do. And a lot of the times they're like, oh, why don't you do this? And I'm like, I don't do that very well. Thank you so much, sir. Let us try this. An aspect of life is everything you do is a form of practice and habit building, for better or for worse. So if you go home and sit on the TV and watch Netflix, no judgment, but you're practicing getting better and better at that. And if that's not what you want to be doing in your life, if that's not your goal, then you might want to think about how can you better align your goals and your practices or your habits. So how do you train BJJ? Well, in a lot of places, we go to school, we call it an academy, some places call it a dojo, and the structure of a class is that there's a demonstration of a sequence, and there's repetition with feedback, so we partner up and we go back and forth and we try to do the thing, and then we roll, we spar, improv, if you will. And so there's a conversational analogy for class where the demonstration of the sequence is kind of like a short phrase. So it's like repeating back and forth, the cat fell out of the tree. And so I go with my partner and I say, the cat fell out of the tree. And she says the cat fell out of the tree. And I say, the cot fell out of the tree. She's like, Cynthia, you said cot and not cat. And I'm like, oh, again. I do that all the time, right? But that's what it's like. So then when it comes to rolling, where I'm with a new partner, I'm ready to go, and I'm like, the cat fell out of the tree. And they're like, my dog ate the steak off the counter last night. And I'm like, what is a dog? So there's this aspect of you're constantly encountering things that you may not know. And so eventually with time and with practice, particularly spaced practice, particularly practice that has feedback, you need the person to say, you said cot, not cat. And you're better off if you can also, I miscalculated my slides. In terms of feedback, you want also some feedback that is helpful, but that can also help you with concepts. So just not more sentences about cat, but get someone who can help you understand what a cat is. How does a cat relate to a dog? And so high-level BJJ, right, I said that jiu-jitsu was a conversation. Well, high-level BJJ is like a rap battle, right? So you have someone, Eminem is there, and he's saying his real name is Clarence, and Clarence lives at home with both parents. And everyone is like, oh! And that's what it's like when you're watching good jiu-jitsu. You're like, I can't believe that person just did that. Oh my God. And there's a rhythm, and it's really, really fun to watch. But to get there, you have to sit on the bus, and you have to like think of your rhymes. And I actually haven't seen 8 Mile, so I don't really know what happens in the green arrow. But probably some uncomfortable situations where Eminem learns. So what can we derive from that? One is that you can rarely learn by only observing. So Professor Mike, that wonderful smiley human who you saw giving me my brown belt, as he says, he's like, look, if you could learn by just watching, just go on a YouTube, watch a video about how to trade stocks, and you'd be a billionaire. But that's not how it works, right? You have to actually get involved. You have to do the work, and you have to get a lot of things wrong. And the structure of your training is critical. So you have to understand the what and the why. So going back to that cat fell out of a tree example, you have to understand, like, oh, I'm just learning short sentences. I'm not actually learning what a verb is. I don't know what a cat is or a dog is and how they relate. And maybe I should, right? And there's an aspect, and this is kind of more, we're starting to invert now for that, if you're an instructor, you're a professor, you're a mentor, you're a manager, in terms of the why, to understand also where might there be gaps in what, how you're helping people learn. So some people just they learn spontaneously. They happen to be really naturally good at this thing. They were never taught it. They got to figure it out on their own, and they don't know how to teach it to other people. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just something to be cognizant about. And what's really important is, how do you know what you're doing wrong, right? So in jiu-jitsu, I know the person's not tapping. They're still breathing. They're still like, talking. They seem very, very comfortable. But I also want feedback. And so I ask, what did you feel like? What kind of adjustment did I need to make? That kind of thing. And that's really important. Something that people like to ask is BJJ magic. Well, if you look at this, and there's Mikey in the black, and then there's Mikey like subsumed by the blue on the side. Mikey won this fight. And so you say, well, it's BJJ magic. BJJ uses leverage, and leverage amplifies force, but it can't make magic. And just in terms of life lessons, like, the feather's going to stay a feather. You can't make the feather lead, right? Like, so there's an element of just, when you're working on a problem, understanding the circumstances that you're in. So circumstances might be external. They might be like the rule set, for instance, in a competition. Again, this is purely BJJ focused at the moment. I'm so sorry. Or circumstances might be something that have to do with me. Literally, like, the length of my whatever bone this is has a tremendous impact on what I can do in jiu-jitsu. And it depends person to person, and also then role to role. So it could be the same partner, but he's gained 5 pounds of muscle since the last time we rolled. Well, that's really different circumstances. And so I need to understand how I'm both benefited and disadvantaged by my circumstances, and I need to build a strategy for how I'm gonna hopefully win. If not, learn. We have this nice saying that some people agree with, I do, which is there's not winning and losing, there's winning and learning. Tell that to the guy on second place, right? Like, he might have a different opinion. And then, something we talk sometimes, you might have heard about what happens when you punch above your weight class. And I am one of the smaller non-child people in my academy, so I know a lot about what it's like to fight above your weight class. And in terms of significant effects, there can be great benefits. Like Mikey, the world loved him so much more because of the heart that he showed in this fight. But that's a lot to deal with, and there might be some physical repercussions. And so it's just something you want to think about. In terms of, if you are really, there's a big difference, or there's a big delta there between kind of where you are and where you might want to be. So wait, why do I leave at 5:45 a.m. to do this whole not face-to-face contact thing. So as it turns out, BJJ is actually magic, at least for me and the people that really embrace it. And for me, it's a place where I feel safe to be challenged and get things wrong. And here's another magical aspect of BJJ as far as safety, is that I can go literally anywhere in the world, into a place full of strangers, and I know that when I tap, they will respect the tap, and what is happening to me will stop. And there's just something really amazing about that experience. It's a community where I can ask for help, and not only is it available, but it's joyfully shared with me. We are crazy people a lot of the time, and we really are really interested in details. You know, like this grip is really different from this grip, which is different from this grip, and we will spend hours talking about it. And so if I have a question about that, there are tons of people who are there to help. And a side note too is like, I don't know some of those people's names. It's amazing. You will train with people and you're in the most physically intimate positions, and it's dangerous. They might break my arm or tear the ligament, and yet there's an aspect of all we are doing is this. This is the only thing that we're doing right now. We're not our jobs, we're not how we grew up, we're not how we identify in any different categories. We are just two people coming together to do this one thing in this moment. And so it's also an experience that contextualizes the other aspects of my day. Like a lot of the time, the worst thing that's going to happen to me has already happened, right? Like I've already nearly passed out. So like this email having a typo, like maybe it's okay. Which isn't to say I have lower standards, but just in terms of my personal level of anxiety, what happens when I see the typo, rather than like crawling under my desk and sobbing. It's like, oh, okay, there'll be another email tomorrow that I might get something else wrong, right? And this, in terms of being uncomfortable, like, but this is an opportunity that I feel like my light can help warm and illuminate. I am in a position now, I have enough knowledge, and I've developed, seemingly, I've tricked them all into thinking that they should listen to, not all, some people, the inexperienced ones, into listening to me, but there's an aspect of feeling like I contribute meaningfully, which is really, really satisfying. And so, am I saying that you need to train jiu-jitsu too? Well, and I will play this clip, because, I mean, how could I not?
Someday the people of this village will have to face El Guapo. We might as well do it now.
In a way, all of us have an El Guapo to face someday. For some, shyness might be their El Guapo. For others, a lack of education might be their El Guapo. For us, El Guapo is a big dangerous guy who wants to kill us. But as sure as my name is Lucky Day, the people of Santa Poco can conquer their own personal El Guapo, who also happens to be the actual El Guapo.
So from that, you can extrapolate. Do I think that you should train BJJ too? Of course, but you may not choose to. And I hope instead, if you decide not to, that you find something that gives you a safe place to make mistakes, that challenges you, that helps you grow, and where you can feel like your light is helping to warm and illuminate. So that is, we're not going to do this again. And that's how Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and the Princess Bride 8 Mile and the Three Amigos can change your life. Thank you all so much.
Who knew that? Wow. I just want to say, I studied Aikido for 1 year. I got punched in the face. That was it. Thank you, Cynthia. Oh my goodness, I learned so much from everybody here, honestly. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you all for coming out again and hearing the beautiful tips of our professionals here on campus. Just to let you know, we are doing this throughout the year. Next month, we might be taking a break. However, check your emails. There will be more information in your inbox for the next Pro Tip event, which will probably be around April, but check your email anyway. And I think we have a sign-up sheet somewhere for anyone who would like to share their professional tips. We have a sign-up sheet right there in the back on the right side of my line of vision. I know you all have really good information because you're here. So please share it with the community because we obviously love hearing it. Thank you all so much. Have a lovely Wednesday, or Tuesday. It's Tuesday.